Hi, I'm back again. I want to talk today about stone setting because in the 282 class, which is our intermediate class, I want everybody to learn how to do prong and tube sets. If you get really encouraged and excited about doing more stone setting, we can talk about channel sets and bead sets and flush mounted settings. But I kind of think with stone setting, you kind of have to it's like with skiing, you want to learn how to snowplow parallel before you get to parallel, because there's some skills that you need to know. So in the beginning class, you guys all made a bezel with a flat cabochon stone, and so that gave you that sense of how you're going to hold the stone in place because we can't solder it down. So that's where I like people to start, is to start with cabochon stones and settings, and then what I like to have people do is go to a tube set, because tube settings, and that's this one here, is very similar to a cabochon setting, except that we're working with round stones. And what you do is you get the tube that's the right size. And what you need to know about tubing is there's an inside diameter and there's an outside diameter. And so we're giving you a kit that has a 4mm stone. And that 4mm stone, these are little CZs, which are great. And then we're also giving you a piece of tubing and a little Tiffany prong setting along with a 4mm burr, so that you'll have everything ready to go to make your set. And so when you're looking at the tubing here, the outside diameter of this tubing that we're using is a 4.5, and then the inside diameter, I can't do that with this calipers, the inside diameter is smaller than 4mm. And what that allows you to do is to take this burr down into this and create a seat for your stone to sit on. And then once its stone fits in there really well, you can push it over just like you do with a bezel set. So this is my sample I did when I first started teaching school. This is the tube that's soldered on. This is where it's been burred. You can see the seat in there, and then you can see that the stone has been set in there. And not in this video, but the next one we'll actually go through setting a tube set. So in my mind, learning how to do a cabochon and then going to a tube set is really a great way of going. You can take those tube sets, these are CZs, so you can actually set these tube sets, and I'm going to want people to do them like I had to do when I was in school. We had to make samples, and so this was my tube set here, and I had to put it on a little post, and then I had to stick it in a piece of wood for the final critique to show that I knew how to do all the different settings. What I would like you guys to do is to do the same thing, is to actually cut your tube, put a plate on the back of it, solder a post on one way or another, and then set the stone. And then later on during the class, if you decide that you know what you want to do with that stone, you can unsolder it without quenching it in a bowl of water, and you can solder it onto a piece that you've made. So I think with being in COVID times and us having to really narrow down what we're doing, I want everybody to make a tube set with a post on it, so that you have that experience with it. And then if you have the motivation to do something else with it, that would be great on that. Same thing with the prong settings. These are commercially made prong settings. I always recommend that you get the ones that are stamped die struck and not cast. Here's the difference between the two. The cast ones, they can be a little porous, and when I was working in industry, I would go use these, and when I would go to bend over the prong would kind of snap because it was porous. So I really like what they call die cast settings. These are interesting looking. You just have to be kind of aware when you're setting them to be careful with them on that. So this is for a 4mm stone. The stone's going to sit there. We're going to use that same burr, but this time we're going to go in and we're going to burr a little seat on the prong, and then the stone sits down right on those little shoulders there that maybe you can see with the good camera, and then you push the prongs over, and we'll be showing you that. So that's what's called a prong setting. I don't really like the look of prong settings, and I remember being really resistant to it at school. And sure enough, when I first got out of school, the first thing somebody asked me to make for them was a prong setting. So I think it's worth learning that. There's some fun things you can do. You can put two of them together. You can put them in a ring. This one is a cast ring that I set some prongs in. This one here is on a bead. So there are lots of fun things you can do with it. And prong settings are just basically the 4 prongs holding it over. This was a set of cufflinks I made for my dad, and it's really designed in the same way as what a prong setting is, right? It's holding it at these 4 points of contact, but it's with sheet. So I really like people to understand how prong settings work, and then how you can do some variations on the design. This is one that somebody gave to me, and I'm not saying it's a very good stone setting, but you can see that it's been made out of silver square wire, and the prongs, they're a little tall, a little sharp. I can get my fingernail underneath them, so it's really not well done. But it does give you an idea about prong settings with a cabochon as well as a faceted stone. This is the one that I did last century and tried to give it a feeling that it was like claws. So prong settings are very, very common and what a lot of people use. So those are the 2 main stone settings we're going to do this quarter. There's always somebody that comes in and wants to do a flush mounted setting. And flush mounted settings can be challenging, especially when you're doing it on a curve, and especially if you want to do an oval one. So we will get to those, but I really think you need to go through the process of doing a bezel, a tube, and a prong set before we get into that. One of the problems with the flush mounted settings is, this is a bead set here with a garnet, is that you have to have a thick piece of metal so that you have the ability to burr a seat. And so you can see that I've drilled the hole, and then I burred the seat, set the stone down in there, and this is what's called a bead set. So I've done some little beads, and I'll be showing you guys how to do that to hold it in place. Whereas a flush mounted setting is this one here, where you're pushing it over like a bezel, and there's no signs of any prongs or beads holding it in place. But once again, look how thick this piece of metal is for me to be able to do that. That's on there. The other one that I really like, and I failed at when I was in school, is what's called a channel set. And so this one, I carved this in wax and then cast it, and I made little slots for the stone to slide into. And that's how it's supposed to be held. But what I didn't take into consideration is in the casting process, this shrunk. And these pieces need to be a little bit longer so that you can push down and hold it in place. And so my stone has never really held itself in place. Whereas this one shows you a little bit better on the ends, how by just tapping down the ends, it keeps this stone from coming out. And we can talk more about channel sets down the line that are on there. So those are kind of the basics. I think if you can in this class get a good understanding of a tube and a prong set, you're going to be on your way to doing more involved stone settings, such as a bead, flush mount set, and channel sets that are there.
Go for it.
Hi, welcome back. I'm here today to talk about stone setting. In the first class we do cabochon settings because they're a little less problematic because they have a flat bottom and it's easy to put it into a bezel. But this quarter what I like you guys to do is to do a tube set and a prong set. And we've put in your kits for you a piece of tubing and a prong. And I think in the last video I showed you how to solder them on to these pieces. And then we have these faceted stones that come with it that are 4mm that we're going to be using for that. But first I want to talk about some things that you need to prepare for when you're doing it. But I made these samples back when I was in teaching at the UW. And there's 3 different tubes. The first one here doesn't have anything, but it was soldered on. The second one, if you can look, you can see that I've gone in with a burr, a stone setting burr, and I've burred a seat in it because these are thick-walled tubing. And then this last one, I was able to set the stone in and push it over just like a bezel. So the trick to doing the tube setting is getting the right size tubing. And you need to know the inside of the diameter, and you need to know the outside of the diameter. And so this is a 4mm stone. So my inside of my tube needs to be smaller to hold it, to not have it fall through. And so it's like a 3.8. And then the outside needs to be bigger than a 4mm so that you have the material around it to set. And you know, about the thickness of the bezel wire that you've been using for your cabs is about right. So what we've done is we put together the kit for you, and we've also included a 4mm burr that is a regular stone setting burr. And I do want to talk about burrs in a moment, but just before we go on from there, I just want to show you a couple of things. This was a setting I did when I was in undergraduate school with John Marshall. What I did is I went to, because I didn't have the money for silver, this is just a synthetic stone, but I went and I got some telescoping tubing, and I cut the outside piece, and then I cut the inside piece the same height. But when I soldered it, I dropped the inside piece down in the thickness where I'm showing right here, so that I actually had a seat to set the stone. And then I soldered it. I put it on my little prong, because we had to have these all like sitting in a nice piece of wood. And I just like showing you this because this is basically a step down that actually on the inside here is a way to create that seat for your stone to sit in there. And we did talk about the height that you need, because you need to measure the height of your stone. So this is a sample that's probably older than all of you guys, but that's okay. And then this was a quick demo to show people how to incorporate a tube setting into something. So this is a piece of sterling that I forged and wrapped around. I don't feel like it's a completed piece. I'm still thinking that I need to do something with it. This is a synthetic stone, so I could actually heat this up and pull this stone out and add some other things to it. But you can see that I flattened the edge of the wire to have it kind of snug around the setting, and then the tube setting there. So those are the examples I have for tube setting. One of the things I want to share with you guys is when you're doing a tube set, and I also use it as a prong set, and there are different ways of doing prong settings, and I may do it differently than people on the web or something. But I want to talk about the stone setting burrs. And so these are two different stone setting burrs that are huge, but I'm hoping that we can see them well in the camera. Do you notice this one is like this? And if you look at it, the striations are going like that across here. And the way that the stone settings burrs work, if you ever want to drill a perfectly round hole in a piece of sheet metal, when you drill it with a regular drill bit, there's only two cutting edges and it doesn't really make it round. But these have all these edges that do the cutting so that it makes it perfectly round. So a lot of times I use a stone setting burr not only for setting stones, but also to make my hole perfectly round. This is what's called a tube set burr, or a stone set burr. And the reason why I use these for the tube is that this straight wall here will slide right down into the tubing that I need to create a seat on. So here's my tubing. When this goes in, it can just come and slide down and make a nice little taper there. And then that creates the seat for the stone to sit on. And then making sure that you're at the right height so that when you set the stone, you don't have too much material, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So I really prefer to use these type of burrs for my tube settings. You can also use them for your prong settings. But the other burr I want to show you guys is what's called a heart burr. And it actually has the same tapered bottom. And this tapered bottom matches your faceted stones. So it creates a nice seat. But now this slides back in. And the heart burrs are really good for doing flush mounted settings or bead settings or channel settings or something where you need to cut a notch. So when this one goes in, let me draw this heart burr this way for you. Nothing like Paul Tarantino's drawings, but pretty good. So when you go in this way, you can actually cut this edge and cut a notch into something. So you can have a thick piece of tubing. You can take this and you can come in and you can make a notch like that with it because this tapers back. You could also use this heart burr for a tube set, but you've got to be careful that when you go into the tube that you're straight in there, whereas this burr will make you stay straight. That's on there. And so I just kind of wanted to give you the difference between the burrs, and know that in your kit you're going to have that little 4mm burr that's there. Okay, so I think I've got it kind of covered with tube set. This is a piece that I started making, and I've been waiting and waiting and waiting to finish it for this demo. And you can see that one of them is the thick wall tube that hasn't been burred out, and you can see the other one that has been burred, so that my stone can just drop down in there. And so when I drop that stone down in there, when you should see that the girdle of the stone, and we've already talked about that, is below the height of my tube, and it's just a little bit, maybe, well, it depends on the thickness of your bezel wire, and then that should be able to just be pushed over. So this is the same idea with doing a prong setting. The only difference is with the prong setting that we have here, I've soldered these Tiffany's prong settings on here, and you can see that this one has been burred with a little seat on. So I'm creating the same seat, but with the prong setting, I've just got 4 areas that catch. And the problem with working with sterling silver ones is when you solder them down, they become soft. And then sometimes they'll twist on you, and that may happen to me when I do this one. So another thing to do would be to put this in the tumbler overnight, and it might work harden it a little bit. But I'm going to show you with it soft and all the problems that can happen with it. With the prong set, you burr down in. You burr down a little bit deeper for a prong set than you do the tube set because the tube set has material all the way around that's going to hold it in, whereas the prong set coming up just has these 4 prongs, and they need to have some substance to them to hold that in place. So when I'm doing a tube set, I create a seat, this is much longer, so that when the stone sits down in here, the way I've got it drawn right now, if I had to push all this metal over it, it would end up being on the table of the stone. So what you want to do is you want your outside tube to just be, and I like to call it a thickness of a fingernail, and then I was told that fingernails are different thicknesses. But it's a little bit less than 1 millimeter, so that all you have to do is push a little bit of the material over, and you don't hide so much of the stone. When I burr for tube set, a lot of times the student will come up with, and after you burr your seat, put your stone in it, bring it up, let me look at it, and then I can tell you whether or not we need to sand down some of the top of it so that you can make an easier setting. The thing that people don't realize is here's a cabochon setting, and then here's a prong set. Look at how much farther you have to push this over to hold it in place than the cabochon. So that's why you don't want this really tall, because it's going to wrinkle when you're pushing over. So getting the right height here is really important. And that just takes some experience. So ask myself or ask Erin to take a look before you try to set your stone. Now with a prong set, it's a little bit different because, like I said, with the prong, you've got your seat, and I didn't draw that well. There we go. And then you put your stone in. And what you want to do is you want to burr your seat down deep enough so that across the top your prongs are level with your table of your stone. The top of your prongs look like this, and then when you burr them, they're more like a rectangle. I did do some square stones into a prong setting like this, and I left the top edge rectangular because the stone was rectangular and I really liked the look of it. Some professionals looked at me and said, oh, that's not how you make prongs. But to each his own on that. What you want to do after you've burred the seat is you want to come in with what's called a cup burr. And we have cup burrs. They look like this. And what they do is they round the end. And I think a lot of you beginners remember using a cup burr for your ear wires on that. So after you've burred this, you want to come in with a cup burr and you want to round your prong so that when you push it over, it has a nice round surface on it. So really the burring, the measuring of your stone, finding the right burr and everything and burring is all the same for both a tube and a prong set, but it's the depth that you go in on both of them that we have to look into. So this is the setting here. I just want to show a couple things. This was a bead that I made. The pattern that's on here came from, I acid etched a hammer with nitric acid and then just put it on the hammerhead and embossed it, which I really liked. And then I needed to do a stone setting, so I put this stone setting in there. And then this is a cast piece that I did, oh gosh, I think way back in undergraduate school. And I've put in some prong sets. And originally I had one completely set and the other one was loose, but I think over time this one still needs to get set properly. It's not really set in place. So you can solder prongs, multiple prongs onto things. The standard Tiffany prong setting is with a ring. And instead of setting it on top of the ring shank, I actually made it fit down in. I wear jeans. I like to get my hands in my pockets. And so if I have a real tall stone setting, I have a hard time getting my hands into my pockets. So I lowered it a little bit, but that you can see the 4-prong setting that's on there. And then last but not least, this was a bead that I made, and I thought it would be fun to set prong setting in here. When I soldered it in there, it's not quite straight, so I need to reheat this and rearrange it to have it fit a little more accurately. If you're wondering about this is beading around it, and then this inside piece is actually a gear from a clock. It's brass, so all that beautiful edge around there was the gears and the teeth that fit together on it. So for your projects, we're wanting you guys to just do samples. And I know samples are like, oh, it's just a waste. I want to put them into something. But what I can tell you is we're working with CZs. And so we can set these into the settings, and we can then decide that we've got a design that we want to use it in. We can unsolder the tube here, and you can set it, you can resolder it into a place. So CZs are kind of nice for that. The thing to remember is not to quench, because you'll crack your stone. So if people want to do that, it's really fun to see, especially if you do it with a diamond. When you heat them up to unsolder something, they turn black and you go, oh my God, it looks terrible. And then you just watch it and it just comes back up and they sparkle again. So you just unsolder it, let it cool down, and set. And when I was in school, we used to say diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires and CZs were what you could solder in place. I don't really agree with that anymore, because a lot of the sapphires are being heat treated and they'll change color. And then I think a lot of the emeralds today aren't as clear and they've got a lot of inclusions in them. So I would be a little more careful, but for sure these CZs are a really wonderful experience to see what that goes through in the changing of the heat that's on it. So those are about the burrs. Some things that you're going to need for making your setting after you've got them made is that you're going to need to have your burr, you're going to need to have your stones to measure. So you should have a set of calipers. I just use these inexpensive ones for my stone setting. I've got digital ones that I use in my studio for more of my bigger stuff. But that's going to give me the size, and it says that it's 4mm. And even if you can't read this, if you just pop that out and then you take and you find a burr that fits inside, and then you know you've got the right size. Okay. So you're going to need one of those. It never hurts to have a ruler around that's both millimeters and inches for things. And then also I really prefer to use some burr life, some wax. And then another thing that I'd like all of you guys to do, I learned this when I worked in industry at Mayer Brothers years ago, is this is the wax that they use for foundry work, microcrystalline wax. And so we've got a little ball of it here, and what you want to do is just pull a little bit of it off, pinch it into a little point, and then what's really nice is you can just barely touch it and you can pick up your stones. So usually what happens is a student comes along and they go and they smush it and they get then wax all over it. What you want to do is just get to be really light-handed. And the way to pick it up, I'm going to turn this over. And some people are better with tweezers, but I just found this to be magical for me. And then Aaron, who's really smart, who's filming this, he actually put some of this wax on a dowel so that he's got more to hold on to than this that's here. So I think we're ready to go. I think I'm going to start with this bigger one for you guys to see, but I think you can see that I've already created a seat there. And the other thing that I did is I took some 600 sandpaper, because after I burred it, there was a little bit of roughness on the top of the edge. And I just came in and I sanded that off so I don't have kind of a jagged bezel on this. And then I'm going to take the stone, and this one's big enough I can do it with my bare hands. And I'm going to drop it down in, and I'm going to look to see about my height. And I think what you can see, two things you want to do is make sure that it's sitting flat. So when you're drilling, I do best drilling up and down this way, but I know a lot of stone setters, they burr horizontally. Try that and see if it works. But what we're looking for is inside here, down inside, this lower edge that's in there should be the same thickness all the way around. So kind of really investigate that. And if it is level, then when your stone sits down in there, it's going to be level. And then I don't want this to be as tall as my seat. And I probably could shorten it a little, but I think I'm going to go with what I have there. So usually I burr down in a little bit deeper because I take some of the sandpaper and sand kind of the burr that happens on there off. The next thing to think about when you're setting stones is how do you hold on to stuff? And so this piece is actually nickel, silver, and silver. Came out of my mid-century series that I did. And you can see that it doesn't sit flat. And that can be problematic if I'm burring, if I'm not sitting flat and this is tilted and I'm going straight down, then my stone's not going to sit flat. So you want to make sure that you've got the angles level, and when you're coming down, you're burring at that same angle that's on there. So I think I used a little bit bigger burr than I needed. So I'm going to switch to this little bit smaller one and see. I don't know if you guys noticed, but you could see that when I set this down in here, there's a little bit of slop. It moves back and forth. And I think it's because this is just a slightly too big of a burr for it. So one of the ways you can tell if you've got the right size burr, take your burr and set it on there. And when you set it on there, you should have metal all around the outside edge. And your burr shouldn't fall through there. Okay. Now that I'm thinking about it, though, if I do that, my bezels are going to be two different thicknesses. So maybe I'm going to go back to the same burr that I did. In measuring the burrs, put your stone upside down take your calipers, hold it like that. See, this one is just a little big. And then this one is just a little small. So I'm going to stick with the big one just for the consistency of it.
That's where uncalibrated stones becomes difficult, because sometimes you don't have a burr for like a freehand size.
Yeah, and people that are really good stone setters, what they'll do is they'll burr down and then they'll move it around a little bit to enlarge it. So I got to work with a fella, I can't remember his name, I think his name was Quan, and he was from Vietnam, and he was an amazing stone setter at Mayer Brothers. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to have Aaron come over here. And sitting here, I could use different tools, but this feels big enough for me to work with. So it's going to rock if I leave it here, because I intentionally wanted this to have material on both sides, because it'll make it harder to make a stone setting. No, because I just like the aesthetics of it being in the middle. So what I'm going to do is slide it over to here, and now it's sitting nice and flat, right? Whereas here it's going to want to rock. If I do rock it, I just need to make sure that I'm coming in where this being level here. So I'm going to take just a little bit of burr wax. And some things you want to remember about these burrs is that they don't drill holes. So a lot of the burrs in our studios are dull because people have tried to drill with these. They're designed to cut out, not down. So we've got a hole because it's a tube. We've got a hole when it's a prong. And so we're ready to go on this. I'm going to come in and I'm going to set it on its side. And I'm going to pull my sleeve up so you guys can see. And the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to push down on it and then step on it, because it's going to catch an edge. So you want to get it running, and you don't want to run really fast because that's just going to heat it up and dull the burr. So you kind of want a mid-range. Get it running before you make contact. And if it makes a lot of noise, that's usually telling me that I'm not coming down straight, or my burr is dull. And I was just telling Aaron about flex shafts. I really love my mechanical foot pedal that's probably 30 years old versus these new electronic ones we have in the studio. A little bit better control. So I was running that a little fast. And you should see chips coming off. And your metal should not be heating up too much. Go in a little bit. I'm going to take my sandpaper and just sand a little bit across the top. And the reason why I do that, I could put it on a sanding stick, but what I'm looking for is to see if the wall that I have left is the same thickness all the way around. And I'm noticing I've got a little bit more thickness on that side than the other. So I'm going to come back in and I'm going to push to that side a little bit. And then don't forget, we can look and we can tell if we're straight up and down this way, but a lot of times you're off this way. And I know when I first started learning, I was always tilted like this. So once you diagnose how you come in, then you know to always correct yourself on that. And so I think that's seated not deep enough, but let's try the stone and see how it's doing. And I do want it to be a little bit deeper that's on there. So if I were working in gold, I would be like sweeping all of this up. Silver's not a bad thing to collect nowadays too, with the prices going the way they're going. But I'm going to come back in and I'm just going to go in. Oh, come on, foot pedal. You can always tell when somebody blames something on the machine, but it really is this foot pedal. Okay, and then I'm going to try setting this back down on here again. And making sure that it's sitting level. And since I used a little bit bigger burr, it's hard to tell. But the way to really look is to look inside and see that bottom edge and look all the way around and make sure that it's about the same depth all the way around. And I'm feeling like it's a little knot in that one spot there. So I'm going to come back in, use a little bit more wax. And then once again, for me, if I take this 600 sandpaper across the top, it puts a satin finish on that edge. And then it shows me, I don't know if you can see that, it shows me the thickness of this all the way around. And do you notice that it's a little bit thinner over there? Can you see that, Aaron, in that or not?
See, the light is making it.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a little bit thinner over there. But at this point, I think I'm ready to go. When you set stones, you always want to have, well, I have this belief that when I make parts, I make all my parts, and before I solder them together, I polish them with Triple E to round the edges, make them not you know, dangerous jewelry. And then I solder them together. And then if I'm lucky and all my soldering went right, I can just toss them in the tumbler, and that's kind of like a white diamond. And then when it comes out, I'm ready to set my stones. So you should have everything done on these pieces before you set your stones, because this is a garnet and it's not going to hold up under heat. I do have this little jump ring that I put on here, and it needs to get soldered, I think, because it's not attached to the whole piece, that I can solder that jump ring and not have it affect the stones if I set the stones now. So I'm going to go ahead and set the stones. Normally we have tube set setters that you can just push down and work around, but I have to say that they're at my studio right now because I was doing a pendant that had diamonds in it and I didn't want to mess it up, and it's easier. But I don't own one and probably should get a set of those. I'm going to show you how to do it with the tool that we've been working with all along, which are our stone setting burrs. And then Aaron introduced me to the plastic setters from the guy from Milwaukee yesterday. I think those are great, but they might be too big for small stuff. But for bigger stones and stuff, like Larry Osler stones, they'd be awesome because you could just get around that really quickly. But I'm ready to set this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the one stone in. And then we're going to do exactly what we do when we do a cabochon. Here's my stone. And I want to push it over at 12, 6, 3, and 9. I'm going to look at it, make sure that it's not sitting crooked. If it is sitting crooked, I'm going to pry up a couple of these and pop the stone out and re-burr it. But once, if it's looking good, then I'm going to come in and I'm going to work around and push all the way around. So it's going to take a little bit longer because I don't have that tool here. The tool that I'm talking about comes down and it looks like this, and then it's just rounded on the inside. And you find the right size one that fits over, and then you can just push down and work around, and it does it all at once. I had a student try to use that with a cabochon stone though, and they cracked the cabochon stone. So it's probably more important to know that you need to use them just for faceted. Okay, this is big enough for me. I think I can just go ahead and show you the start of setting. I'm just going to hold my finger down, and I'm going to come over from the top, and you can see that I just squashed it, that one side, right? And then I'm going to hold my finger over the other side, and I'm going to do the same thing. And it's so much fun doing stone setting with two masks on. And then I'm going to come in and I'm push again. Oh, and I just wrinkled that. Oh well, I'll have to fix it. Push that way too far over there. But in looking at it, the stone is sitting level with the edges of the tube. I just crimped it a little too much there. So now what I need to do is I need to just work my way around the stone, overlapping. And this is where those other stone setting tools come in handy. But I didn't know of them for the first 30 years that I did jewelry. So, can you see that it's starting to set down? So this technique is, one of the things I just want to say is I put it in the palm of my hand. These have different lengths. And I kind of like the longer ones. The shorter one is just a little too short for my finger here. So I like the longer one. And then I'm not using my fingers to push because that's really hard on your joints. I'm putting it in the palm of my hand and I'm using my whole arm, going in from the side, and then I'm lifting up. And it's just a repeated process. And I always feel like without that other tool that just mushes it all down at once, that I'm in that ugly duckling stage of pushing the bezel over. So at this point, I don't think it's going to come out. You can see all the tooling lines in it. Once again, I should have probably polished the end of this, but studio tool. So I'm going to come in from the back. And I'm going to try to push it out, and it's not coming out. And now here's a time where you can use a burnisher to smooth it all out. I'm finding that my hands are really getting tired these days, so I end up going in with white diamond and polishing all the tool marks out with white diamond. And think about it, if you are burnishing it by pushing it up against the muslin buff. So I was taught to do it with a burnishing tool, working all the way around, and now I'm saying I want to save my hands for other things. So that one's in at this point, and it's sitting pretty level. And if it's not sitting level, there's nothing you can do about it except take the stone out and reburr it because your seat is crooked that's on there. Okay?
Cool.
So far so good?
Yeah.
Shall we do this one?
Sure.
This is a time maybe to talk about, these are a little long though. I'm just gonna hold on to it. Should I talk about these now or not? Options? Or should that be another video?
Yeah, we can talk
Okay.
about it.
Okay. So let's grab this guy. You're making me work today. You know, and having to do it this way with teaching, I realized what I used to love doing was, it's like Colbert talks about, he really hates doing his shows without an audience. And I feel the same way, because when you look up and you see the aha moment for somebody or they ask a question, it's so much more engaging than, no offense, you're a good audience person, but it's not the same as teaching a group. Oh, this is messy. So this is my tube setting that I need to do, and when I'm looking at it, it's like it's parallel. The tube is parallel to the post, but what isn't is the little disc that I put on there. So there's that optical illusion that's going to drive me nuts. But I'm going to go ahead and burr this, seat it, heat it up, and pop it off, and put it on something else. but can you see that in the film, in the picture? Yeah, it's off. It's driving me crazy. So I've done the same thing again here. I've got my stone. I've measured it. Do measure these, because I think we ordered all 4mm stones and everything, but it's a good practice. Got my stone, got my wax, I've got my burr, and I'm gonna come over. It's funny how you get used to your own jewelry bench. So to do this, this is here so you have something to hang on to. You could do that if you wanted to and come in, but I'm gonna feel a lot safer just holding it like this, getting it running. Remember not to push down and then start it, because it'll grab. So get it running. Do you notice I have my arm propped up against my bench pin? And the GRS engraver Benchmate is really a great thing. We don't have that here. And I bet Aaron can tell me whether or not I'm straight up and down from that side.
You tipped a little away from yourself. There you go.
Still doing that after 30 years. Okay, now I'm going to look around, and on that inside shiny edge, do I see it all the same level? If I don't, I'm going to lean a particular way. Okay. So I'm going to take a little bit of that 600 just right off the top. Get the burr off. And then I'm going to pick up the stone. I'm going to drop it in there, and I know it's not deep enough yet, but it's good for you guys to see. Can you see that? So that diamond setter I was talking about at Mayer Brothers, he taught me something that I thought was really interesting, because all he did was set diamonds all day long, and it's like, how can you see between the white gold, this is silver, but the white gold and the diamond, if it's sitting right? And he goes, well, what I do is I take a black Sharpie and I mark it all over my stone, and then that way I can see the difference. And then when you put it in the ultrasonic cleaner and everything, it cleans it all off. So that's an option for you there. But I'm looking at this, and I'm seeing that my stone push it down in. It's sitting a little uneven. So now can I get it out? Oh, come on. I'm gonna go back. If you go a little too deep, you can always sand it off. And then sometimes I'll turn it, because then that'll correct my being not straight up and down. Gonna look at the edge. I had a student who was using a burr that was so dull that she kept saying, it's getting so hot. If your piece gets hot while you're burring it, it's because your burr's dull. And it shouldn't take very long to burr that seat. I'm gonna set this back in and see again. So it looks like it's, what I'm looking at is the table of the stone and the top of the tube, because this bottom section is off. And I think it's looking okay. But can you see how thick that bezel is? Most likely I can push that over, but sometimes you can't. And so you might want to go in and just bevel the edge a little bit. And I'm going to do that because I'm going to show you. Well, let's see how it works. This is, I work in my studio all the time on a lathe, and I love lathes because I was introduced to them in the 8th grade shop class that I took. But I want to show you that a lot of jewelers use these to set their stones. They'll actually literally put their tube in here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get away with that because this is a big long piece. but I'm gonna see if I can put this in here and then show you just two things that are interesting. So I can put this in, I can try to tighten this down, and then we'll see how off it is. Not bad.
It really is just that middle plate.
Yep. So a couple things you can do if you want to cut things straight. You can put a piece of tubing in here. You can turn it like this. You can get it running, and you can use your jeweler's saw and you can cut off your tubing, which is really neat. The other thing that we can do is I can sand the end of my tubing with my hand. So it's rotating and coming at me. Do you notice I turned it around for that reason? But I can also thin that edge down a little bit, which is what I'm doing with my 600, just so it's going to be a little bit easier to push over. And I could use a file. I do want to say, if you're going to work with files, please don't use them without a handle on them, because when I was in school I saw somebody jabbed into their hand. So if I were going to use a file to do this, I would use one with a handle on it. But I think this is going to work for us. Should I be able to put this stone in here and set this? There's some jigs that people have made to hold these, which is really nice to make them more like a lathe. And that's another thing I need to get out and show you guys, but not today. So my stone's in there. Shouldn't it be that if I do this?
Oh yeah. Clever.
I'm doing the same. That's probably why I've never bought those tools that I took home this weekend. Don't tell my boss. Because I think of it working like a lathe. So I started out kind of from the side, and then I worked up a little bit and up a little bit more to see about setting it. And do you notice I have my thumb on the other side? That's because this is annealed and it might bend on me, so I'm supporting it. And then the other thing that you should really pay attention to, I've got my hand. The reason why I have bad neck and shoulder problems is that my upper body is like a vise. And so I'm getting myself all prepared structurally, just ready to not be able to move anywhere and get exactly what I needed on here. And how does that look? Okay. I think I can push it over a little bit more from the top. Set down. So what's really lovely about diamonds is you can take a piece of tubing, put it in the flex shaft. You can burr your seat by holding this and running it in. So what's going around is the tubing, not the burr. So it's the opposite, which I really love. And then you can set your stone just like I did. Cut off your piece of tubing, probably white gold if you're doing with, or yellow gold. Take it over, set it on your piece that you're going to solder it, let it cool down, and you're done. So that's one of those interesting things about diamonds is you think you'd be more afraid to work with a diamond, but in a lot of ways gold and diamonds are easier to work with. I was really blessed that when I got out of school I got to work for a couple of years with manufacturers, and so I learned how to do things with that expensive material at their cost. So there it is. The setting is much better than the way that it's set on here, but I think at another time we'll do a video and I'll show you how I'm gonna take that tube off and set it onto something else. Look okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And then do a test. If it comes out with your wax, you're in trouble. Another thing that I like to do is I like to take and put my diamond or my stone, if it can go into an ultrasonic cleaner, I like to put it in an ultrasonic cleaner because that'll shake it around, and if it's going to fall out, it's going to fall out there, and it's going to fall out into the ultrasonic cleaner and not on the floor or walking down the street. So that's kind of my backup on there, is my ultrasonic cleaner. So there we go. Here this time with my now prong setting sample, and it too is wonky. But it'll work. I'm gonna probably cut them off and put them on something else. What I want to do is I want to measure my stone, and I want to find the stone setting burr that's right. And then before I even do anything, what I want to do is I want to put the stone setting burr onto the prongs, and I want to make sure that from this side, these two prongs, the burr is touching it. And then I want to turn it a quarter turn and make sure that the other two prongs are touching. Because sometimes when you solder, this gets dropped and then the prong will get bent in or bent out. We want to make sure that these are all where they need to be before we start burring them. Okay, and you don't want to start burring from the top. You want to start burring down in a little bit. So I'm going to take some burr life, and I'm going to set this up, and I should be doing it over here. Sorry, Aaron. And I'm going to start the burr running, and I'm going to come down. And I'm going to rotate it, make sure that I'm doing it right on all of them. And what I should see is the seat cut the same depth down the prongs. And then from the top of the prongs, each one of these top prongs should be about the same size. If they're not, it means one of the prongs is moved in or moved out. And one of the things that happens with sterling, because I soldered this on here, is they're soft. If you push down really hard on it, they're going to spread out and be problematic. So make sure that you've got a sharp burr. And if that happens, what I would do is throw them in the tumbler overnight and let them get work hardened. But I'm thinking that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to try putting my stone in there. And then we need to think about how far down I need to burr down. And so can you see that this prong over here isn't burred as deep? So I'm gonna mark that, because by the time I spin those around, I'm not gonna remember which is which. And I'm gonna go back in and burr. And what I wanna do is I wanna burr this down so that these prongs are at the height of the table of my stone. Take it out. That's a good sign that it stayed in there. And I'm gonna come back in. And one of the things you can do is you can just put your stone upside down and then also push down on it, and it should pick it up. And then we want to see that's not sitting straight, but I think it's because the way I pushed it in there. Let's hope that's what it is. When you work with 14 karat gold prongs, you don't have the problem of these wobbling, oops, all over the place. Let's try again this way. How's that look?
Pretty good from this angle. Maybe the one that's facing me now is a little higher.
Oh yeah, okay. So what do? I can go in and I can target that one. And I just pushed, I went in and then I pushed to that side of the prong to cut in a little bit more. And so you notice I'm rotating it to make sure. So this guy over here still looks a little tall. And I think if you look at this, this is standing straighter up and this one is over there. And could you see that I could just push that with my finger and get that prong to move? So I'm looking to make sure that these are at the same angle. And let's try it again. That one's still a little tall. And that is the opposite of the one I marked. So when I use the cut burr on these, I'm going to do a little bit more burring down on this one. Okay, pop it out. So cut burrs, deciding on which size cut burr is the right one. That's always challenging a little bit, but what you want to do is make sure that it fits over all of it and rotates around it. So I'm going to switch burrs. Just like a lot of things, if I want all of the tops of these to be the same, I need to like burr at the same pressure for the same amount of time. And so maybe I'll count a few seconds. So I'm going to start with the one that's marked. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then next one. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And somebody who does this all the time isn't going to be doing this because they know how to, it's just so innate. But now can you see that those are round on the end? I sound like my grandmother. Back when I was in school, we didn't have cut burrs, didn't know about them. Cut burrs are so nice. We would have to file them ourselves. Okay, so I think it's okay. I just think the problem is because the shaft is off. It's on there. What do you think? Those are perfect. This one seems to be still a little taller.
Yeah, it's like angled that way.
This one's angled too much?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's push him. Let's push on him. Now too much. Did I just go down the rabbit hole? Nope. Yeah, and so we're looking at the angles like this, but we also want to look at them straight on and make sure that they're not cockeyed this way too. Okay. So the way that I was taught to do this was just to take my regular bezel pusher, hold it down and push, and you can do that. And just what you want to do, and I'm going to draw this, is you have your prong like this, right? And the notch in here and everything. What you want to do, and you've got your stone and it's level with the top, right? Whoa, what a lousy drawing. But anyway, level with the top here, and these are rounded now. And this is probably calibrated better than my drawing. What we want to do now is if you take and you push this whole thing over onto here, this is going to then shove that way. So what I like to do is I like to push it partway over and push the other one partway over, and then the other two, and then so they're like this now. Then they're going to be up just about like that, and then when all four of them are there, then I like to come back in and push them down. Parallel jaw claws for prongs, and what's neat about them is this adjusts. So you open it up as wide as your prongs are, right, and the opposite prongs, and then tighten it until it's just snug, and then you can pinch, and then that'll push them over. And what this does is it gives support on both sides so that it doesn't go flinging that way. And I'm not that great with these because I don't have these in my own studio. But let's give it a try. The first thing I want to do is go opposites each other and then pinch a little bit. And then these here. And a master stone setter will probably be going, what the heck is she doing? So now I've got it pinched tight. But what I want to do now is I want to pull one of those prongs over the top. And it's so hard to see when your eyes are... See how I just bent that over a little bit more? And now... See how that one bent over a little bit more? Not completely down. Don't want them completely down until I get all of them. And I'm also working on white paper, which is hard to see. Probably harder for the camera. Are you getting any of this?
Yeah.
Is it making sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so right now, this isn't going to pop out. But I bet this is going to catch on. My stone setter says you put it on your clothes and you do that to see if it works. And these could go down even more. And so what it is now, I was straight at first. Now what I want to do is I want to see how I've turned that? So that now and I don't classify myself as a great stone setter, but I know the process of it. I just don't do it often enough. My tube just bent. So it's not coming out, but these need to come down a little bit. And what I would like to do, as I work that way, is I want to put them in this vise. You can tell I'm a metalsmith because I love hammers. I'm going to tap on them a little bit instead of... Can you get to that? So I can, the way that I set them in the past is I would take my stone setting tool and then push up and over. And you see how that made that roll? Mm-hmm. That's because they're so soft. And then I'm going to hold this other side while I push over. And then I'm going to go back to the other side. And I'm going to push. And those two are pretty much down now. And I got to do the opposite side. Okay. Go down a little bit more. And I like to do opposite sides. What's the science thing? For every reaction, there's a reaction. And so what I should have done is put this in the tumbler before I set these, because can you see that one's bulging a little? And so I can probably just push this back and forth. Yep. And so you want to do the cut burr before you put these down, because you don't want to grind into the diamond, or in the case the CZ. So there it is. But now what I would do, can you see how they've kind of curved a little bit? Not supposed to do that, but it's because they're sterling. And this one's leaning a little bit more. Can I push it a little? Yeah, push it back. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the buffing machine and I'm going to polish the tops with some white diamond. And when I polish it, I'm going to have the wheel coming around and hitting here, and then here, and here, and here. You want to do white diamond, not triple E, because you'll wipe out your prongs. But that also burnishes it a little bit and puts them down a little bit more.